desire, believe when I say that I want it that way. Tell me why it ain't nothing but a heartache. Tell me why it ain't nothing but a mistake. Tell me why I never wanna hear you say that I want it that way. Whether you like the Jackson 5 or New Kids on the Block or One Direction or NSYNC or Backstreet Boys or BTS, we got something for you today because we're talking about boy bands. Let's go. Welcome to Pop Culture Catechism, conversations about music, movies, and the longings of the human heart. Let's get started. What is the key to real love? And how come we're attracted to some people, but not other people? How come some people just got that spark that makes us notice them? And how come some relationships just seem to take so much work? Are there ways we can learn to kind of hack our relationship to make it better? Or is it all written in the stars? We're going to talk about that and much more today because we're talking about boy bands. I'm very excited. My guest today is Regina Boyd, who is a marriage and couples counselor. And she also runs a podcast which talks on that topic as well. So I'm very excited to have her. Before we get into that, I want to tell you a little bit about Awaken Catholic and this show, Pop Culture Catechism. If you would like to support Awaken Catholic and specifically Pop Culture Catechism, go to popculturecatechism.com where you can become a patron of the show. They have 6 tiers that you can choose from and choose your giving level that fits with your budget or fits with your tithe. And you also get access to exclusive content in the Awaken app. With every episode, we release exclusive content, and also many of the talks that I give as part of my speaking ministry are available in there as well. So, for example, with today's episode, at the end of this episode, we will be discussing how do couples reconcile and good ways for couples to reconcile. So if you want that content, what are you waiting for? Go to popculturecatechism.com, join our patron community. And the app is not just for patrons. You can also go to theawakenapp.io, and there's lots of free content there too. It's a great community for Catholics and Christians and like-minded people who just want a little bit of less toxicity in their social media experience. It's a hub for all the shows on Awaken Catholic. It's an easy way to access all those shows and also access for those who are patrons to get that exclusive content. There's also a prayer library there. There's a music library with lots of great Christian music. So lots of good stuff going on in the Awaken app. I highly recommend that you download it. But before we get into it, I need to tell you about popculturecatechism.com, where you can become a patron of this show, just like our patrons right now. Thank you to all our patrons, especially Lisa and Bob Tenney, Steve and Maggie Hubbard, Jacqueline and Ryan Olivet, Carl and Melissa Gore, Tom and Emily Cambariati, and Rob Smith. They and all our patrons get access to exclusive content, talks by me and other show hosts, and pick one of the 6 tiers of giving at popculturecatechism.com, and you get lots of perks and access to that community, including our conversation. So today on Pop Culture Catechism, I am happy to welcome my guest, Regina Boyd. Regina, how you doing?
Hi, Mike. I'm doing great.
Great.
Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. We've been trying to put this together for a while, but the schedules didn't match up, and I'm glad I was persistent. I'm glad you were patient and you got right back to me. And so I'm very glad to have you here. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Yeah. So like you mentioned, I'm a therapist, a wife, and a mom. And basically what we do is we provide counseling and coaching for couples, families, and teens, working around relational issues, parenting issues, those types of things. It all comes down to the heart of emotions and relationships. So it's a little bit about me, I guess. Mm-hmm.
And you also run a podcast.
I do have a podcast. It's called Connecting Out Loud, and we talk about all of those things related to building a good marriage, a healthy family life. So whether it's specific to a couple or parent-child relationship, parenting interventions. I have a lot of guests on from time to time. So I've had different guests from Father Josh Johnson to Dr. Bob Schutz. So anyone who can provide some, psychological insights from their perspective is really fun to get to do that as well.
Yeah, definitely check out Connecting Out Loud. I was listening to some episodes today, and I listened to a few months ago when I first found out about you and who you were. And after I was listening to her, I was like, oh, I got to have her on my show. She's got a lot of good stuff to say, and it's just been a lot of good fruit for things that are going on in my marriage. So thanks for what you're doing. I think you're helping a lot of people with your show, and I would assume in your practice as well. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Thanks be to God. Yeah.
So if you don't know what a boy band is, you probably know what a boy band is, but I figured we should get a definition. So I went to Wikipedia, and Wikipedia says a boy band is loosely defined as a vocal group consisting of young male singers, normally in their teenage years or in their 20s. At the time of formation, they sing love songs marketed towards young girls mainly. Many boy bands dance as well as sing, giving them highly choreographed performances. And they list acts such as Jackson 5 and the Osmonds in the 70s. In the 80s, New Kids on the Block, and groups like Boyz II Men. In the 90s, in the aughts, Backstreet Boys and NSYNC, 98 Degrees, O-Town, 5, LFO, what many consider to be the golden era of boy bands. And then in the 2010s, more recently, we've had groups like One Direction, BTS, The Wanted, and 5 Seconds of Summer. And there's probably a lot more we could name, and probably some of our listeners and viewers right now are like, you didn't name this boy band. And we can't name them all, but they're not forgotten. So I dressed inspired by some of the more ridiculous boy band outfits. I think fashion is part of being a boy band. In a boy band, you got to dress a little bit weird. So I decided I would dress a little bit in my most boy bandly way today. So
yeah, I catch the vibe. You've got the vibe going.
All right, so. What do you like about boy bands? Like what is it about them that makes you or makes anybody be like, oh yeah, I can dig this music? What is it? What do they have?
So, I mean, the middle school version of me loves them because,
yes.
I think that's exactly right. They just spoke to my little girl heart at the time. And, I think what's really nice about them is they're overall pretty positive.
Mm-hmm.
There's not a lot that's really high drama or ultra intense, other than just tapping into those regular, everyday human experiences that we've all had. We've all had that person that we wish liked us, and that we were not sure if they feel the same way, or we had someone we were connected to and we broke up and we're longing for them again.
Yes.
They just hit on all of those experiences. Or you are with someone and you're in love and everything's going great. And so I think they just do a great job of tapping into those moments that we've all experienced, and that they just know exactly how you're feeling. Yeah. I feel like everyone can relate in a way.
Yeah. And I feel like, I forget what this is called, but there's some name for this phenomenon where if you see one beautiful person, like you notice them, but if you see like a bunch of people next to each other, it's like enhances the whole group. So if you see like a bunch of girls together or a bunch of guys together, for some reason they're all more attractive because they're in a group. And I feel like boy bands benefit from that by having like 4 or 5 moderately good looking guys on stage, and then they're singing and they're dancing. All of a sudden, oh my gosh, they're all so hot. Like there's something about that. And, so like I am not the target demographic for boy bands, and I probably never was, but I was into theater in high school, and I was into a cappella music. My brother was in an a cappella group, and I just loved a cappella music from a young age because my brother was into a cappella music, and so I think that was kind of my gateway into boy bands, was one through theater, because it is kind of theater-esque, singing and dancing, and that's impressive what a lot of them can do. And then I find that the boy bands that I like the most tend to be the ones that have the best harmonies and do the most a cappella stuff, and that really spoke to me as like, wow, there's some impressive stuff going on here. So I love the harmonies, I love the dancing. I also just like having more than one voice in a song. I think it can add a lot of power to a song to have another voice come in. I think hip hop does that a lot. You know, like there'll be one rapper on, and then the second verse, whoa, who's coming in on the remix? Like there's a power to having a second voice come in and step into the limelight, and then now it's their turn to shine. So and boy bands kind of bring that into pop music, what's very popular in hip hop and other types of music as well. It's kind of fun and over the top. Like like I said, the fashion's over the top, the dresses over the dancing's over the top. It's all kind of it's almost a little vaudeville in some ways. But I think you're right. It is pretty good, clean fun. You know, it's something your parents can feel okay about their middle school girls having a poster on their wall, and it's pretty PG-13. And I think boy bands at their worst are when they start to get like kind of a little dirty. You know, like there was that one NSYNC song called Digital Get Down, and I feel like everybody was just kind of skeezed out. And there was, I forget which boy band this was. It was one of the ones in the early 90s, like, baby, when the lights go out. And it was,
I think that might have been LFO, was it?
I don't remember. I don't know. But
yeah, but I do remember that song.
It was 5, says Nick De La Torre from the producers.
Darn. Okay. Darn it.
But I feel like a lot of times where boy bands start to go wrong is when they start to get a little bit too dirty. Like nobody needs to hear Nick Carter being like, "Am I sexual?" Like, okay, Nick Carter.
Yeah, that I agree. That's definitely weird.
Well, also just what I did was just weird because that was weird. But what made me want to have a talk about boy bands today? Let's put that picture I have up there. So the boy bands we're going to focus on today are Backstreet Boys and NSYNC. Those are the ones from my era when I was in middle school and high school growing up. And then New Kids on the Block was that was more when I was like, 5 and 6, and maybe some of the girls I was in school with were into them, but it wasn't really my era. And then when I was a high school teacher, which I did for about 10 years, a lot of the students were into One Direction and more recently BTS. So those are the groups we're going to focus on today. And I think there's some common themes. And I had this idea, these groups, mostly they talk about relationships. Ooh, girl, you're so great. Ooh, girl, I want you so bad. Ooh, girl, I'm so sorry. And it's kind of basic level stuff that speaks to our hearts. But I feel like there is some stuff that can be gleaned from it specifically in relationships. And I was like, I wonder if there is a marriage counselor out there who's a big music fan. And so I was kind of searching around, and I found you, Regina, like in your bio on your website, it like talks about like the music you like. And I reached out to you and you were like, yeah, let's do it. So I'm excited we get to have this conversation. So the first question, very important. What is the best boy band, Regina, and why is it NSYNC?
Oh, no, you did not go there.
Sorry, go ahead.
Okay. Reluctantly, I am a BSB fan, so I have to say BSB with probably Boyz II Men are tied. Okay.
Respect.
But, even though I am in the Backstreet Boy camp, I will admit that NSYNC does have some rhythm and musicality to their music that is enjoyable to listen to.
All right, so tell me, I'm just messing with you, but tell me about Backstreet Boys and Boyz II Men and what you like about them. Then I can fanboy about NSYNC. So.
Okay. Backstreet Boys ultimately the best because again, that's just my middle school heart. But what I love about them is they just seemed very relatable, very personable. Very classic marketing, like there was something for everybody in each of those characters. And I think that they just emulate, again, to me, a real purity in love and a male pursuit of a woman. And I think they really do a great job of tugging into those heartstrings of the female heart. And song after song, they just, in my opinion, they hit it out of the park every time, in that, as far as that goes.
They have some really good songs.
They have some great
Yeah,
songs.
really good songs. Like even third and fourth album, there's some bangers on there. So
That's true.
Sorry,
That's
I cut
true.
you off. Finish what you were saying.
No, you're good. You're good. And when I'm thinking about Boyz II Men, I'm, remembering, Motown Philly, like you said, the harmonies. I mean, Boyz II Men with harmonies, that's really hard to beat.
Yeah.
I don't really know many
Cooley High
other.
harmony.
Yes, exactly. I don't know many other bands that can vocalize the way they do.
Yeah.
And so I have to put them up there for that reason.
Yeah, absolutely. Boyz II Men. Boyz II Men is up there. Boyz II Men was, I remember the first time I ever bought a cassette tape that was not like, it was music that I liked, and it wasn't just music that like my brothers liked or my parents liked. And it was MC Hammer and MC Hammer, Too Legit to Quit, and Boyz II Men, Cooley High Harmony. And I bought those like 2 tapes with my Christmas money, and I like brought them home and I started playing them, and my brothers were like, what is this? We listen to Bon Jovi. Like we listen to U2. Like we're a rock and roll house, little brother,
Let's initiate you.
Yeah. So, very cool. So obviously, my favorite boy band is NSYNC, and it is because they harmonize so well. Boyz II Men and Backstreet Boys both do a lot of harmony, a cappella stuff, but I just feel like NSYNC has the whole package. They dance. They got tons of great voices, and not just 1 or 2 good voices. They all have good voices. Lance, I mean, he's okay, but the rest have fantastic voices, and they all can dance, and and JC. Good grief, the pipes on that guy. He's just of all the boy bands,
he is very good.
Amazing. I think it's like all the like boy band voices. It's like JC is number 1. Brian Luttrell from Backstreet Boys is number 2.
He's my favorite one.
Yeah, he's got an amazing voice, and he did a Christian album. I don't know if you knew that. Yeah, he did a Christian album back in like 2006. And then maybe Zayn. We'll throw in Zayn from One Direction has a really good voice. I'll throw him in there. But yeah, just I love NSYNC, and all my like junior and senior year of high school, like all my friends were into them. It was like all the school dances and the prom. So I just have a lot of fun memories. Like some of my buddies and I tried to learn the dance to "It's Gonna Be Me."
Bye bye.
No,
it's gonna be me.
Yeah, it's gonna be me. Like the. Yeah, that's an iconic song. So, but
at my school, I have memories of the guys going down the hallway doing "Bye Bye Bye" and stuff.
Yeah, and like when it was Dress Up as a Celebrity Day, like there were 3 different groups that dressed up as NSYNC. So it was fun to be in high school at that time. So let's talk about some of the songs, and the song that really made me want to talk about this from a relationship point of view. Think of this as almost like boy band pre-Cana, like boy band marriage prep is I Want It That Way, which I think is like as much as I say NSYNC I think is the best boy band, I think I Want It That Way is like the quintessential archetypal boy band song. It's got a key change. It's got like the different guys singing at different parts. It's just, it's perfectly crafted. Max Martin is the songwriter. I love Max Martin. He's written so many good songs, and this is just classic Max Martin song. They kind of talk about this song as like, it doesn't even really make sense. The lyrics don't even make sense. But in my experience of marriage, it totally makes sense. Like how many conflicts come down to, I want it this way. Well, I want it that way. I never want to hear you say that you want it that way because I want it that way. Like that makes total sense to me. Like that is a real conversation that has happened in my house.
Oh yeah.
Like so, you have this desire between you. You love each other. You want each other, but maybe you're married now, or maybe you're just further along in your relationship and you're starting to work on some issues and you realize like, oh, we're not 100% compatible all the time. And how do you start to work through these times when you realize, oh, we love each other, but now we're 2 worlds apart. There seems like there's something between us. And so I'm hoping that maybe you can give us some advice from your practice. Let's say a couple comes in and it's just kind of they're disagreeing in kind of an unhealthy way about different things that they want, just kind of normal everyday things. Do you have anything you can speak to that?
Yeah, the first thing I would say is that's totally normal. Like you said, it's for every relationship. It's true because that is the experience that if you're going to have more than one person involved in a situation, there's going to be a disagreement inevitably.
Mhm.
And so I think a lot of people assume that, a good relationship means I never argue or I never have a disagreement. And that's not true. It's really about how you argue, how the
Mm.
disagreement occurs that makes the difference. But yeah, I think there's some really cool concepts out there. Dr. John Gottman, I'm a huge fan of him.
Me
I've
too.
done several trainings with him. Yeah.
Mm.
And he talks about this concept of solvable versus insolvable problems. And the statistic is crazy. I think it's like 69% of problems in a relationship, he would say, are unsolvable.
Whoa.
And so when you find yourself having those arguments over and over again, like one of you is always on time, one of you is always late, one of you's the morning person, one of you's the night person, and you get frustrated, you say, look, I told you 100 times, can we please just be on time? Like just once, please.
Mhm.
That is something that would be considered unsolvable
Okay.
and maybe more in tune with somebody's personality and the traits that they have. And so the shift is, again, shifting to how do we have a conversation around that unsolvable problem, as opposed to interpreting it as this is, you're doing this on purpose, or
Mhm.
interpreting as you must not care enough about me to want to change this.
Yeah, or you disrespect me.
Exactly. You
Yeah.
disrespect me. And so when we can change our perspective in that way and really get to the deeper meaning behind it, why do I care about being on time? Why do I value that so much?
Mhm.
And what is it about me that's making me so frustrated? What have I told myself about being on time or being late, really, that's making me so upset?
Mhm.
And so when we can tap into those things, then that helps smooth the conversation a lot more. So I would just tell people, another thing I would say too, I'm kind of tangenting here.
No, that's fine.
So a lot of times people will think, I'll just use my own self as an
Mhm.
example, but I could look at another gentleman or another relationship and say, well, Mark's on time,
Mhm.
maybe I should be with him
Uh-huh.
because he's on time, then I'll solve all my problems. I can be on time to everything. And what people don't realize is that might very well be true. I could go leave my current relationship
Mhm.
and go be with Mark, and we could be on time to everything together for
Mhm.
the rest of our lives. However, Mark has his own set of problems
Yep. Yep.
that I will then have to deal with that are going to be different than in my current relationship. And so you
Mhm.
might be avoiding and changing one problem, but each relationship and each person comes with their own set of problems that are going to rise up. Like I said, anytime two people are involved, there's going to be conflict
Yeah.
inevitably.
Mhm.
You're just changing what type of conflict you're going to have.
Ooh, okay.
So
I-
you might as well figure it out, right? Try to have
Yeah.
that dialogue.
That's really interesting. That makes me think of so many things, but just I dated a lot through my college years and through my 20s, probably too much. I probably dated too much, but I found that was true just in a dating relationship. Is I would think like I'd get out of one relationship and be like, all right, well, in my next relationship, I want to make sure that I have a girl who is this, and this. And it was things that weren't true about the last girl. And then my next girlfriend, she'd have those three things, but then she'd have other things that the first girlfriend had that I never really appreciated and kind of took for granted. And be like, oh, well, those things were pretty important to me too, And I think you're absolutely right. Like part of what makes the relationship work is not finding someone you're 100% compatible with, because I don't think that exists, but finding someone that you can work with your incompatibilities. And I think what you said about the solvable versus unsolvable problems, the priest that did our marriage prep, me and my wife, Maddie, he said that couples that stay together for a long term or couples that break up, they don't argue more or less. You would think the couples that break up argue more, but he said the difference is not in how much they argue or disagree. The difference is in how they disagree. And he said the couples that are successful is they see each disagreement and each fight as you and me versus the problem. Whereas couples that eventually break up, the less healthy ones are the ones that see it as you versus me. And the you versus me couples are the ones that animosity builds and builds and builds. Whereas the couples that can see it as you and me versus the problem, they're the ones that are able to, you know, have long-term love and have a much healthier relationship going forward. So that's something we often remind ourselves of, is if one of us, me or Maddie, one of us is getting heated, the other one says, we're on the same team. I'm on your team, you know? And that's like such a helpful reminder, like, oh yeah, I was seeing it as you versus me, when it's not really you versus me, it's us versus the problem. So.
Absolutely. That's fantastic advice. And I think if more people remembered that and kept that in mind, it would make such a huge difference, because if one of you wins the argument, the other one loses.
Oh, yeah.
That means your marriage loses, your relationship loses, ultimately in the end. So you never want to be you versus me. No way.
That's a really good point. I never thought about it that way. Yeah. You don't want to make your spouse lose. Yeah.
Right.
Wow. I mean, it seems so obvious when you say it that way, but how many times have I been like, well, I'm right. I'm going to win. Ha.
Right.
Point proven, you know, and I feel really good about myself, but you know, what does that get me?
Right.
So speaking of trouble in relationships, I was talking about It's Gonna Be Me, and I just love that little walk down bass line that they have. I could just play that all day. I think it's just so fun musically. And then of course the memes of Justin, it's gonna be May, you know, it gives me an excuse every May to go back and listen to the No Strings Attached album, and I love it. So I want to talk about this song because it's about trouble in relationships. It's everything I do is not enough for you. Actually, don't, Brent, I don't have the lyrics for this one, so you can leave it off. Sorry about that. But everything I do, it's not enough for you. And it's basically kind of this situation. It's like, I do all this stuff and I know you've been hurt in the past, but I'm going to be better for you and you don't appreciate me, but someday you'll realize that it's going to be me. I was the one all along. And it's kind of this snarky, you know, you didn't recognize what you had, but someday you will, because I'm all that in a bag of chips. And so I wanted to talk about what causes, like, what are the things that you really got to look out for if you want to make sure your relationship isn't toxic? And I know every relationship has issues, but what are the things you really need to watch yourself for in your relationship and try to fix?
Yeah, there's 4 things you definitely want to listen for or watch out for. So those are criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. They're called the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse of a relationship. So if you notice there's a lot of critical remarks to one another, if you receive a criticism or a request from your partner and you're being defensive about that, you're quick to defend as opposed to taking in that information and figuring out something to do about that, that's a sign. And that's a tricky one because I feel like that happens a lot.
Yeah.
And then contempt is interesting because contempt is like criticism on steroids. So criticism kind of breeds and leads to contempt, where we start to have a seething resentment, an underlying resentment to our criticism. You know, well, yeah, you're too lazy, right? You're too lazy. You wouldn't want to pick that up anyway, right? Mm-hmm. Here I go again, cleaning the dishes right after you because that would be too difficult for you. Mm-hmm. So contempt has this sarcasm and bitingness to it that's a little different than your average criticism. Mm-hmm. And then stonewalling is essentially what is known as shutting down. Mm-hmm. The conversation gets too overwhelming and you are either checked out in some way, you're non-responsive. So that can look like turning on the TV to tune somebody out, leaving the room, just a glazed over kind of look, and no longer engaging in the conversation. Mm-hmm. And so if you notice those 4 things, and like I said, those things will come and go from time to time. Mm-hmm. So I don't want you to panic, you know, oh my gosh, I criticized somebody the other day.
You're not like absolutely doomed if you have these.
Right, exactly. You're not absolutely doomed. But if you see all 4 of those on a regular basis, on a consistent basis, like daily, on the regular, for weeks, months on end, now we're starting to be very concerned.
Yeah, call Dr. Regina.
Yeah. Yeah, because those really are what can end up leading to a divorce, leading to the end of a relationship if
Hmm.
that gets too ingrained in your normal everyday patterns of conversation.
Did you find couples are able to like break those habits if they work at it?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think the biggest thing is awareness. So if
Hmm.
you can catch yourself and recognize those patterns, what are those things that you usually get hooked up on or tripped
Hmm.
up on? Um, then you can start to intervene on your own behalf and
Yeah.
sort of stop yourself. Or if you're willing to, this can be kind of touchy, but if you felt like your relationship was strong enough where you could call each other out,
Hmm.
that's a tricky one because then you might cause another fight, right?
Yeah.
Like, don't call me
Hmm.
out on that. How dare you? You know,
Yeah. Hmm.
oh, you only see what's wrong with me, but not what's wrong with you. So you have
Hmm.
to be really careful with that one. But if you could get to a place where you guys agreed to have some type of code word, maybe it
Hmm.
could be any word, watermelons, whatever, like just to say, like you were saying before, okay, we're outside of this and we want to solve this problem together. So
Yeah.
we're going to be having each other's back and looking out for, when we notice criticism pop up or, hey, I think we're doing that negative pattern of communication again,
Hmm.
watermelons. And that's our clue to just take a step back and say, okay, how can we reword what we're trying to say? How can
Hmm.
we be kinder in our conversation to one another?
Yeah, I think that's kind of like what I said before. Sometimes we'll say like, "I'm on your team." Like that's kind of like our code word is like just
Right,
remind ourselves
exactly.
we're on the same team. That's really interesting.
Exactly. And the more
Um,
you do that over time, the more it'll become a habit.
yeah, yeah, and I think a lot of times people don't even realize what they're doing or the effect it has on other people. Like, oh, I wasn't stonewalling. I just needed some time to think through. Or maybe your family didn't talk about problems growing up, and so you thought when people had a fight, what you needed to do was just kind of lay low until things calmed down, and then you could just go back to normal, and things didn't get addressed. And maybe that was normal for you growing up, but now that you're in a relationship and you're trying to do better, well, now that same behavior is perceived as stonewalling. So it does take some self-awareness, and that's I think where somebody on the outside, like a counselor, can be so effective. I find a lot of times, and you can tell me if this has been your experience, I find in Christian circles and Catholic circles, a lot of times people are reluctant to go see a counselor. They're like, oh, we talked to our priest about it, or I went to confession about it, or I went to my spiritual director. But they don't want to go to a counselor because if I go to a therapist or a counselor, now I'm crazy. Now our marriage is in trouble, right? And we don't need that, but we talk to our priest. And I feel like it's real easy in Christian Catholic circles to like kind of over spiritualize these things. And they're just like, well, if we just pray a rosary all the time, not that praying a rosary is bad. I love praying the rosary. I pray the rosary all the time. But I don't think. Do you find that people over spiritualize their struggles sometimes and try to pray their way out of it and kind of avoid some of the hard work that needs to be done?
Oh, yeah, definitely. And I don't know if it's necessarily them avoiding the hard work, but
Mm-hmm.
I think that we just put this blanket, the Catholic blanket over everything and say, pray, offer to God. And all those things are true and
Yeah.
beautiful. And at the same time, we have to have a perspective about the other things in this world that are helpful to us. So,
Yes.
for example, if somebody had cancer or diabetes, we wouldn't judge them for going to chemo treatment and getting insulin. We wouldn't say, like, oh, just offer it up, pray your rosary,
Yep.
and your cancer will be gone. But we're there. We're holding their hand in the hospital with them. We're
Mm-hmm.
bringing them food and, driving them. And we're also praying the rosary
Yes.
and we're
Yes.
offering masses and
Mm-hmm.
communion and whatever we're doing for them. And so the same thing with a relationship. You don't want to wait until you're about to get divorced to go to
Yes.
therapy because that's too late, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
You've had all those habits and everything ingrained. There's so much pain and hurt. It's really hard to undo a lot of that. I think
Yeah.
on average, couples don't usually seek therapy until 6 to 7 years after issues have shown up in their relationship. So
Ugh.
just think about that. Living in a certain way, 6 to 7 years, it takes a long time to undo all of that
Mm-hmm.
work and all of those bad habits that have been formed. And
Mm-hmm.
so, um, prayer is wonderful and good, but there's also really great professionals out there that can help us and help us analyze the dynamics of a relationship, see all of those aspects, and help put a spotlight on what you can do as a couple to improve those dynamics, with strategies, with tools, with, maybe some additional mental health support, depending on what's influencing the dynamic, and
Yeah.
then be on your way. Go get the insulin, go get your chemo treatment, go to couples therapy. It doesn't mean it's a disaster, but we
Mhm.
have things in place. We have eye doctors, we have things in place to help us when we need help. And, that's the same thing.
Yes. Amen. Amen. I'm so glad you said it. You know what it reminds me of is in, I forget exactly where in the letter of James in the New Testament, he's calling out some of the Christian communities, and he says, if a brother comes to you and is hungry and needs food and you're like, God bless you, I'll pray for you, but you don't actually feed him. Like, what good is that? Like, God made us both a body and a soul, right? We're not just a soul. Like, that's not Christianity. Like, that's Gnosticism. That's a heresy we got rid of a long time ago, that we are a body and a soul, and we're not just supposed to serve people's souls, we serve people's bodies. That's why we have corporal and spiritual works of mercy. And what I've studied, one of the things I studied, I was a high school teacher. And so in our education class, we talked about like Maslow's hierarchies of needs. So like, to feel safe and be able to have intimacy, which is kind of a higher level need, you need to, I guess I'm getting those backwards. To like have a level of intimacy, you need to first feel safe. Like, if a kid is hungry, he's not going to be able to learn at his desk. You need to satisfy that lower level of needs. And it's kind of similar to the corporal and spiritual works of mercy is you got to feed people, you got to clothe people first, and then that's the next level of the gospel. The first level of the gospel is to proclaim liberty to the captives and raise up the downtrodden. And as you're doing that, then they're open to, the words of the gospel. And not that we shouldn't preach the gospel to people. Don't get it twisted. I'm not saying that, but we got to do the whole thing. It's not an either or, it's a both and, as we're so often so fond of saying in Catholic circles. You got to do both. And the same thing is true for our marriages. You can't just pray for your marriage. You got to do for your marriages. As St. James says, be doers of the word, not hearers only. We got to do both parts of it. Serve the body and the soul. So,
absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So, this is good. This is really good stuff. I want to talk about, there's so many good songs that have, from boy bands that I feel like have this like great, beautiful vision of marriage. And I'm thinking of songs like One Direction's Little Things. I don't know if you ever heard that song. It was actually written by Ed Sheeran, but it's this beautiful reflection on like the girl, and she has like all these insecurities. She has to squeeze into her jeans. She has these crinkles in her eyes. She has these dimples in her back, and she hates them all. But he's like, no, these are all the little things that I love about you, and they all add up to you. And it's you they add up to is the line. I'm in love with you and all these little things is what it says. It's just a beautiful reflection. I feel like that's a great image of what marriage should be. Or I'll think of Backstreet Boys. I'll never break your heart. There's NSYNC has This I Promise You. One Direction has Drag Me Down. That's another great song. Like, nobody can drag me down when I'm with you. Like, there's the power of a good, healthy relationship to just help people face life's trials. Maybe you could talk a little bit about, like, tell us about some of the success stories. I know you can't share too much because of confidentiality and that sort of thing, but like, what does it look like when a couple is addressing these things, not just letting them build and build and build? Like, what is the vision of the beautiful marriage look like from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny, when I'm working with couples who really are willing to jump in there and do the hard work, it does kind of feel like I'm floating a little bit, like I am listening to one of those songs, because it's just so cool to watch it unfold, to watch people sharing their hearts, being vulnerable, opening up. There's emotion sometimes, there might be tears here and there, but it's that moment of connection where people are willing to, when you're talking about sharing your imperfections, that's really scary to be vulnerable with someone in those moments. And I think that's where a lot of conflict can come up, is because, does my relationship feel safe enough? Do I even want to share with you how my day was? Because the last time I said something about my day at work, there was criticism, or there were, you made fun of me, or you said something about how I should have done something different, when really I just wanted somebody to hear me out, and, somebody to lean on in that moment. And so, you want to talk about imperfections. That's a way of me emotionally hiding an imperfection of mine, of having a bad day at work and being scared to share that. And so being able to have those moments are so critical. And so the couples who are willing to go there, who can provide a sense of safety in their relationships, who can turn towards one another in those moments when somebody has a bid, which, a bid for connection is any type of desire to connect or get the attention of your beloved. So that could be, oh, wow, you're driving down the road and you're like, wow, look at that house. The paint is nice, or that mailbox is so cool. And the other person has a choice in that moment. They could be, they could respond to that bid, turn towards the bid is what we would say. And they could turn and look and say, oh, wow, yeah, that is nice. Maybe we should order a mailbox like that or something. Or they could, turn away from the bid. That looks like ignoring. Maybe they were the passenger scrolling on their phone, don't look at all, or maybe a grunt like, but not really acknowledging it. Or you could turn against a bid, which is even worse, of saying, oh my gosh, there you go again. I always want to spend our money. Like, who cares about a mailbox? Like, and so these things are so important. So the couples who are successful are very attentive to those bids. And when somebody wants to make a connection, they respond every time. They turn towards, not every time, but more than enough. The majority of the time. I think you need that 5-to-1 ratio.
That's really interesting. I think so often we just look past those things as that's just normal things. Like, oh, look at that. But that's an interesting perspective, that those are actually that person bidding for attention and wanting to connect. I feel like that's me in my relationship. I'm more the extrovert. My wife is more the introvert. So I feel like I'm like the puppy that's almost like, let's do something. Let's go do something. I feel like sometimes she's even just said to me, like, do you need attention? And I'm like, yes, I need attention.
See, that's great. She responded to your bid.
Absolutely,
she knew.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's been a process for us, like learning to, like, me realizing, like, oh, maybe I don't always need to be reaching out so much, maybe I need to find other things to do. And maybe, and then her learning to recognize my bids as well. And then she has bids for attention in other ways. That I wouldn't necessarily recognize. I don't know if you think there's anything valid in love languages, but I know for something my wife and I have talked about is like how we consider what is quality time. And like for me, quality time is like very active. Like, we're going to go do something, we're going to have a conversation, or we're going to have an adventure, or we're going to do this, we're going to do that. Like, there's something that we're doing together. Whereas her, like, we could just be next to each other, and that's quality time. And it took us a while to realize, like, her just wanting me around was a way that she showed me she loved me. Like, when I was working as a teacher, she would text me like every day at 2:30 and being like, when are you coming home? And I think for a while I almost saw that as like nagging. And I learned over time, like, oh no, that's her way of bidding for attention and saying, like, I love you, I miss you, I want you to be home, and not like, get home right now, stop working, So that took some while to understand that was her reaching out. That was her way of saying that she loves me. So do you think, I was saying that I'm more the extrovert, I'm more the one that's like bidding for attention more often. And I see in these boy band songs, men that are very attentive to the woman, right? They're gonna fulfill every dream. This I promise you, no matter what, I'll never break your heart. Can some of that be a little bit unhealthy? Like, can people almost like make their spouse or their boyfriend or girlfriend, can they like put too much on them? Do you see that happening sometimes?
Yeah, I think there's needs to be some moderation of expectations at times.
Okay.
Right? So
that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, there's like, again, I think we grew up, too, with Disney and all of these ideas of riding off into the sunset. And again, that's great. It's feel good, but it's not necessarily everyday life. Those might be, we all have those riding off into the sunset moments. We have those peak days throughout our life, but it's not the day to day, like when you're driving by the house, commenting on the mailbox. That's not going to be your sunset moment. And so I think it's important to make sure our expectations of one another are realistic.
Yes. Okay.
That we're not going to have that euphoric boy band experience type of romance all the time.
Yep.
Not every date night is going to be traveling to Venice and going on a gondola ride and, all of these romantic things, by candlelight. Sometimes your date night's going to be sitting on the couch exhausted and in sweatpants and, just hanging out, So,
you mean married couples don't have sex every night? You mean that's what you're trying to tell me?
No, I don't think so. Maybe some might.
Maybe some.
But,
yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
just managing expectations here. Okay.
Yeah, definitely not. Don't put that as an expectation. Especially once kids come along.
Yeah, that was something we talked about in marriage prep. Is our priest, which we were a little shocked at first, but he was like, so. How frequently do you think is reasonable for a married couple to have sex? And we were like, whoa, okay, so we're going there. But that was a helpful conversation for us for the first years of our marriage. And even we're almost 10 years in, like that, it's been good to manage those expectations. So
absolutely. Yeah. I think everyone should have that conversation, especially once you're engaged and leading up to marriage. You gotta make sure you're on the same page about that stuff.
Yeah, I think especially in Christian Catholic culture, we talk a lot about chastity and we talk a lot about purity, and that's great. I've given a lot of chastity talks, purity talks. I think, chastity and purity are great. I always try to pair it with a message of reconciliation for people that have made some mistakes. But I think sometimes in our quest to show with the beauty of marriage and the beauty of sexual love within marriage, sometimes we can kind of, I think sometimes we give people the wrong expectation that once you get married, it's just sexy time all the time. And there's it just happens. Whereas then you get married and, people grow up with, trauma and abuse and, shame and all lots of people have all sorts of issues surrounding sex, and there's physical issues, emotional issues, psychological issues, and all that stuff has to be worked through. And that doesn't mean the chastity and the purity stuff isn't true. It's absolutely true. I believe it 100%, but it's not just wait until you're married and you're going to have this amazing intimate sex life. There's more to it than that. So yeah.
Absolutely. And all of those ideas about what were you taught even about sex growing up? So trauma aside, what were your family conversations around that? What did you believe? Did you believe it was a good thing or not?
Yeah.
And if you thought it wasn't, then what are you going to think when you are married and about to engage in that marital embrace? And so all of those things can influence how we approach our relationships.
Yeah. One of there's a couple I was very close to. And after they got married, I was we were just catching up. We hadn't seen each other in a few months. And I was just asking them how things were going. And we had I was very good friends with both of them. And I was privy to a lot of things that probably most people wouldn't. But I remember her saying at one point, it's weird that sex is okay now. It's before it wasn't okay. And now it's okay. And I'm still working that out, I think that transition can be hard for some people. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
I cannot let this episode go by without talking about probably the biggest boy band song of the last 10 or 15 years. One Direction's That's What Makes You Beautiful. Do you know this song? It was.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been everywhere. Baby, you light up my world like nobody else. The way that you flip your hair gets me overwhelmed. The way you smile at the ground, it ain't hard to tell. You don't know, you don't know you're beautiful. I remember when that song came out, it was probably 2013, 2014, somewhere in there. And I was doing a lot of summer camps with teens that summer. And first of all, just everyone was listening to it. It was all over the radio, but we took it. I was part of a group of musicians. I was the adult leader, and then we had a bunch of teenage musicians, and we would travel around those different service sites and do music. And we went to this adult daycare for people with cerebral palsy. So, people with cerebral palsy, their families would take them to be cared for during the day. So these people have all sorts of, physical and mental disabilities. And we would do music for them. And when we started playing that song, and I just got my acoustic guitar, and there's a bunch of other kids with guitars, and we're all singing and dancing, like the room just came alive. And I will never forget this room of like random teenagers, and then all these people with cerebral palsy at all different levels of functionality and awareness, just like screaming at the top of their lungs in each other's face, like, you are beautiful. That's what makes you beautiful. And it just like, I know that's not what the song's about, but it will forever speak to me that way. That just like, wow. There is beauty in you, and just like the dignity that each one of us has as humans. So I know that's not the meaning most people assign to this song. It's just some like random One Direction song for most people. But like for me, every time I hear that song, like I start to get like tears in my eyes sometimes, because it just reminds me of that moment of, it's almost like God reminding me like, hey, you're beautiful. You're beautiful. You're beautiful. And I think it's easy to forget that we're beautiful and that God loves us. And so that song's a little God moment for me every time I hear it. Last song I want to talk about a BTS song. I'm not that into BTS. I think again, I'm probably past the age demographic that they're aiming for. But they have this song Dynamite, which is really hot right now, and Butter, I think, is a little just came out a little while ago. But their songs are very much like, ooh, yeah, I'm cool, girl. Don't you want me? Yeah, I'm cool, and we're gonna party all night. And it's just kind of this, we're gonna have a good party. I'm gonna look good while I'm doing it, and you're gonna want me. And it reminds me of just like the initial parts of falling in love is you first meet someone, you first fall in love, and just like everything about them is wonderful, and they think everything about you is wonderful. But then at some point you get to that point where you start to realize those things that are incompatible. And so I was hoping maybe we could just take a couple minutes to speak to how do we make that transition from we're in love to we're trying to make this be like a real relationship long term. Do you have any tips for any couples in that space?
I think the biggest thing is to pay attention to making sure you're staying up to date on what you know about each other. So in the beginning, it's so easy to absorb everything about the other person. What's their favorite movie, what time they're going to be at this, class or work, it's about 5:15. They're probably, rolling up to this block on this street. Right.
Yes.
And then eventually we sort of lose track of those details. And it's really funny. My husband and I were actually on a married couples retreat recently, and they played a, not so newlywed game. And so you had to answer all these questions like, what's your spouse's favorite movie? Where would they want to travel if they could go anywhere in the world? Mm-hmm. And I remember just a sense of anxiety especially as a therapist, and like trying to answer these.
Together, yeah. Uh-huh.
Right. I'm like, how am I, how do I get as I'm trying to answer the questions, what I think he would say. But we forget, over the years, as you make that transition into the newness wearing off, it's really important to stay up to date on everything, because we change, we evolve. Mm-hmm. So 2-3 years in is going to look a lot different than 10 years, than 20 years. And if you don't remember anything except from what you first learned in the first year of your relationship, mm-hmm. then you might not know that person anymore.
Yeah, time to start dating again.
Right, mm-hmm. Exactly. So I think that is a huge help to make you feel like keeping that same sense of excitement, the mystery of the person alive, because we really do grow and change. I mean, if you think about friends from high school or something, and they comment on something about you and you see them like, oh, remember when you did this? And like, now you're like, I'm not even close to that person anymore.
That's not who I am anymore, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. Do you even know me? And so we have to do the same thing in our relationships.
That's awesome. That's good advice. Babe, when I get home, We're going on a date. That's to my wife. And this episode I'm hoping to release right around Valentine's Day. So to all you viewers, listeners, happy Valentine's Day. Regina, give me your favorite 3 boy band songs.
Okay. Motown Philly, or no, End of the Road. I want to say End of the Road.
Okay.
Because it's the ballad. But Motown Philly, I really do love. It's honestly more my favorite.
I love the boy band thing when the bass guy is like, baby, I know I did you wrong. Like that's, yeah. I love that. And that's an End of the Road, I think. So anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. Quit Playing Games with My Heart.
Oh, such a good song. Yes. Mm-hmm.
And All I Have to Give. And if I don't know if you remember, but Brian Luttrell gets a lot of airtime in both of those songs.
Yes. Yes. Those are both very good songs. So, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I love those.
Very good. Very good. I think mine, No Strings Attached. That was the name of the album, but that song is just awesome. And they did like a Madison Square Garden tour DVD, and they start with that song and just like they fly in and then they're like marionettes, and it's just, they're singing and dancing. It's incredible. And like when Justin first like steps off and sings his first thing, they like stop and the whole crowd just goes nuts for Justin Timberlake. And he's got his little like macaroni hair, and he's in a bandana. It's hilarious. I Want It That Way, I think, is just like I said, the quintessential boy band song. I really love I Thought She Knew, which is an a cappella song that NSYNC did. It's just all a cappella. Joey Fatone gets a feature, which he didn't get a lot of airtime at all, but in that song, and he kills it. And then honorable mention, One Direction's Little Things, by which Ed Sheeran wrote. I really like that song too. So I cheated a little bit. I threw in a 4th one. Regina, thank you so much for coming on and talking and sharing your expertise with us. So remind us again about your podcast and where people can find you.
Yeah. Connecting Out Loud is the podcast. You can find it in most podcast apps, whatever you listen to. And then on Instagram, I'm at Boyd Counseling Services, and Facebook, Regina Boyd, LMHC.
Very good. We'll put all that in the show notes. And that's awesome. I am Mike Tenney. I am host of Pop Culture Catechism. You can find me at MikeTenneyMusic.com and at PopCultureCatechism.com. And if you would like to become a patron of this show, you can go to PopCultureCatechism.com and pick a tier where you can choose your tithe or choose your donation, and then you get access to exclusive content. Regina and I are going to talk a little bit about reconciliation for a few minutes, and that will be the exclusive content for this episode. So make sure if you're a patron, you check that out. And if you're not a patron, what are you waiting for? Go to PopCultureCatechism.com and become a patron. Regina, thank you so much. Would you mind if we close with a prayer?
No, absolutely.
Let's do it. In the name of the Father, the Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. Good and gracious God, we thank you so much for the gift of relationship. We praise you that you have made us for relationship. You have made us for relationship with you and with one another. In a special way, Lord, I ask you to be with anyone who is struggling in their relationships, to help them, give them the wisdom and the courage to take the next steps in repairing their relationships with one another and with you, and even our relationships within ourselves. And if anyone out there, Lord, is lonely, especially at this time of year, Lord, we ask that you would draw close to them and comfort their hearts. We know that you love us no matter what. Amen. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you, Regina. Thank you, Pop Culture Catechism. We'll see you next time.